Okay, so as a continuation to our previous video, to address the great challenges that existed within the educational landscape, it was suggested that we look at a new way of approaching education, a new way of viewing the children within the education system. And therefore, the White Paper 6 on Inclusive Education was seen as a solution to the challenges that were being faced by teachers at the time. And as it says, this change would permit all children, including children with disabilities or differing abilities, to develop and extend their potential and participate as equal members of society. So this shouldn't be only seen in practice, but also in the mindset shifts that take place within our communities. No longer do we see children with differing abilities and challenges as other or different, but rather as children within our system that have a different type of ability. So along with that, the White Paper 6 talks about full service schools, which we've spoken about before. And full service schools are schools and ordinary schools, but they have special equipment and resources and staff members who are able to help children and assist children with barriers to learning within the normal or mainstream school system. A district-based support team, so there are the district-based support teams and the school-based support teams. And the school-based support teams are obviously housed within the school, and they work with the district-based support teams who are from the district, so that can be a team of educational psychologists or social workers or teacher support and advisors and so on. And the district-based support team introduces strategies and interventions that will assist educators in the school and help with coping with the diversity that learners present with, and also help teachers to upskill themselves, which will enable them to accommodate these learners within the classroom. Because remember, teachers that have been teaching for many, many years may not have been exposed to the inclusive education modules that you are currently working through. So the district-based support teams help teachers to include those skill sets in their teaching repertoire. Okay, so let's talk about what is inclusive education. This is part of Unit 1, and so it's just going to give you another review and another chance to go over again what inclusive education is about. So as used in the White Paper 6, inclusive education and training means to acknowledge that all children and youth can learn, irrespective of the learning differences that they present with, and also knowing that all children, irrespective of their ability level, need support. So students that are very high performing or are able to keep up with the curriculum, they need support in being able to navigate the work that they do. And also beyond that, if they've reached a point where they if they reach a point where they've covered all the content, how do we support them in going further? Students who are gifted and who are able to work beyond their grade level, they also need support. So irrespective of if you are keeping up to date with your grade level or not, you as a child or the child in your class does need support. So enabling the education system to meet the needs of all learners, acknowledging and respecting differences in learners while building on similarities. So we respect and even celebrate differences found within our learners, and we help our learners to see that our differences are what make us unique and special. And also we find similarities between learners so that they can connect on these similarities. We also acknowledge that learning is more than just formal schooling. Learning happens everywhere. Whatever learning your students come to the classroom with is the part of the foundation upon which you will build further learning. So take into account that they are not what they call empty vessels. In some theories have called empty vessels. They are our students, learners, human beings are not empty vessels. They always come with pre-knowledge. They always come with knowledge that has been learned at home and within the community, and it's good for us to know what that knowledge entails and what it looks like. Also fostering attitudes, behaviors, teaching methods, curricula, and learning environments that meet the needs of all our learners. And so this is very important because fostering attitudes and behaviors and changing mindsets is an important part of inclusive education. So we understand that every child has the ability to learn, and everyone is unique and important within our community. Maximizing learner participation in educational culture and curriculum, and uncovering and minimizing barriers to learning. So if we learn what the barriers to learning are for our students, we are able to accommodate for them and minimize them so that they no longer become something that the student feels that they can't deal with or they can't work with. So for example, a child that has a auditory processing challenge or a hearing challenge, if we are able to identify that because we understand the red flags for hearing challenges, Those can be minimized by implementing various strategies, by them going to the clinic, seeking treatment for their challenge. All of that can be accommodated if we know that our student has a learning or a hearing challenge. We can perhaps have them closer up to the front of the classroom. We can use different types of audio and visual stimulation and aids that will help the child to access the information both through using their eyes and ears and allow them to still learn at the same rate as other students. So this part over here is quite important. In the inclusive education system, the provision of education for learners with disabilities or differing abilities is based on the level of support that learner needs to address the specific barrier to learning that she or he is experiencing. So learners that require low-level support would attend what they call ordinary or neighborhood schools, so our public schools, and educators here will be trained to be able to meet the needs those learners present with. Learners who need a moderate support will attend a full-service school, and they will have a wide range of resources available to accommodate a child, and they would be able to provide a greater range of range of learning needs. And so they go to another step. So if there's additional support needed, if there are specific tools and resources needed for a child with moderate learning needs, they will be able to provide that. Every district is said to have at least one full service school, and these service schools also support what we would call neighboring or ordinary schools with any type of resources that they need. And learners who need a high or intensive level support would attend special schools, which will also serve as resource centers for ordinary schools and also full service schools as well. And full service schools will also help to support ordinary schools. So what does the White Paper 6 call for? It calls for various actions, and these include orientating management, staff and governing bodies to the inclusion model. Classroom educators are recognized as the primary resources needed to form an inclusive system. So remember a little bit earlier I spoke about a mindset shift. So the inclusive of a mindset shift is also about orientating people, upskilling them to be able to understand what the inclusion model looks like and to understand what skills teachers need in order to accommodate learners within their classroom space. Also, it talks about identifying learners experiencing barriers to their learning as early as possible. Early identification and support makes a really big difference. If learners are and you see this within the schools as well, if learners are at grade 6 and 7 level and they've never had support for their learning challenge, they may be at that grade with very minimal skills in reading. And because of only a certain amount of time allowed in a phase, they have been moved through the system, but they are still not able to do, for example, what they should have been able to do in grade 4. So this really, if early identification really helps us to combat that challenge early on. Then mobilizing out-of-school youth to motivate them to return to school. We want our students that are outside of the school system who feel unsupported and that they are not accommodated. We want to call for them. The White Paper 6 calls for us to have a system where we call those students back into school so that they are able to be accommodated and able to reach their potential. Converting 500 primary schools to full service schools by 2021, that is the goal of the White Paper 6. And these full service schools will help with early identification, because remember it talks about primary schools. And if we identify learning barriers in primary schools, it will really make a big difference for the students by the time that they reach the high school level. Then another point, setting up district-based support teams, and these district-based support teams, as we spoke about earlier, will provide support to teachers and management of schools to understand what inclusive education is about and how to change the system within the school to allow for learning challenges and learning barriers to be identified and accommodated. And then making special schools into resource centers that work together with district-based support teams. If we have these resource centers within our communities, teachers are able to then access all of the equipment and resources necessary for them to do their job in terms of accommodating for learners within the classroom space. So this gives you an overview of what the White Paper 6 really calls for, and I would suggest you just read this area as well. And the one part I would like to say is that the inclusive education system is to be fully implemented by 2021. So I'd like you to critically reflect for yourself how close you feel we are to this goal in 2021. Also, the Education Department has also made a number of other documents available. We will be talking about some of this in Unit 4, specifically the Screening, Identification, Assessment and Support document, which is the CIAS, and we will be looking at how the CIAS will support teachers within the classroom space. So the implementation of the White Paper 6 has been very slow. There are a number of challenges we find within our system: lack of resources, poverty-stricken schools that are understaffed to a great degree. So there are many challenges that do present themselves, but we are a lot closer to our goal than we were perhaps 5, 7, and 10 years ago. So progress is being made. It's for us to really look at what progress has been made and what more still needs to be done. I like this to the side here on the left-hand side, an education system that promotes the full participation and inclusion of children with disabilities, maximizes their personal development, and enables their ongoing participation and inclusion into society. When you have time, please look at some of us are uploaded in this unit. Please look at these websites for further information and use them as additional resource documents for yourself and within your own learning as well. This is the Education White Paper 6, Special Needs Education, Building an Inclusive Education and Training System. We'll be briefly reviewing this document. We cannot go through every page because it is quite an extensive document, but what we will be doing is looking at the main parts of it, and you can then go back to it at your own time and at your own pace and review more intently the areas within this document. The contents page, we will look at what the document includes. There's an introduction by the minister and an executive summary, which we'll be looking at. Then chapter 1 focuses on what is an inclusive education and training system. And you can see there at 1.4, what is inclusive education and training, building an inclusive education and training system, the first steps, and HIV and other infectious diseases. That's quite helpful. Chapter 2, the framework for establishing an inclusive education and training system. And that is something you can go through as well. I would like to draw your attention to 2.26, Curriculum Assessment and Quality Assurance. Please have a look at that as well. Chapter 3 talks about the funding strategy for inclusive education. And then chapter 4, establishing the inclusive education and training system. What is the long-term goal, short to medium-term goals? These points at chapter 4 are interesting for you to learn and to read through because they do help with step-by-step. What can we do now? What are we able to do now? How do we build capacity? How do we identify and establish full-service schools? What is the process? So these are elements of the document that will be helpful for you to go through. So page 5 is an executive summary. I like reading executive summaries, or I like reading summaries. I give you an indication of what the document is about. So for example, at point 1 in this paper or white paper, we outline what inclusive education and training system is and how we intend to build it. It provides the framework for establishing such an education and training system, details a funding strategy, and lists the key steps to be taken in establishing inclusive education and training systems for South Africa. So basically, it's a little bit of what I said in the previous note, is that it's just giving you an outline of the various chapters within the document. So as we've seen in the addressing barriers to learning chapter, as we spoke about in previous units and in the previous video, we look at what an inclusive education and training system is. So you should have a good foundational knowledge at this point about inclusive education. So when you read this, you read it with a lot more understanding than you would have had you looked at this document without all your foundational teaching. So it's a good thing to remember, foundational teaching and allowing your students and allowing yourself to see the same thing a number of times does help you to become more familiar with the terms used within a field. I'd like to draw your attention to page 17, and it talks about the difference between mainstreaming and inclusion. It's a nice table that they've provided here. And then they move on to talking about building an inclusive education and training system and what the first steps need to be. Okay, and so lastly, to end off the video on the white paper, chapter 4 talks about the long-term goals, the short-term and medium goals. So look at these, think for yourself and critically assess for yourself where you think we are in this process in terms of the long-term, short-term and medium-term goals. I hope that this helped you to review the white paper 6 and make it a little bit easier as opposed to looking at a 60-page document and feeling overwhelmed. If you have any questions or any concerns, please feel free to message me or set up a one-on-one Zoom or Skype call with me, and we'll go through any areas you feel are challenging or confusing.